Welcome to this episode of Food Bites. Now we have a special guest here. Andrew Fleet was on about a year ago with us. And Andrew, we talked all about Growing Chefs and a whole bunch of other stuff that happened. You're the executive director and co-founder of Growing Chefs. You're an amazing person. Hear about you all the time and different people and what's going on there. I remember talking with you, I can't remember what it was, 12, 13 years ago when we were at a couple of meetings together and got to know one another a bit. Growing Chefs is an amazing organization. One of my favorite pictures, actually, I have, and I've kept it from a few years ago, is this one. That kind of sums you up. You know, you're a really good instructor, but you can tell the kids love you and stuff. And we'll get into some of that, I'm sure. But I just think it's awesome what Growing Chefs is doing, in schools as well, and not just at your office and other places where you're at. But can you give us a bit of a update on how Growing Chefs is doing?
Yeah, absolutely. We last year was our first year that we were able to fully open to capacity this new food education center that we built over at the Grove at the Western Fair District, and it has exceeded every hope and expectation that we had for it when we started. It's increased our capacity as an organization to deliver more programming in different ways. And I think the most exciting part is it's allowed us to actually meet the needs of the people that we're delivering the programs to in such a more diverse way than we were able to offer before. We're just, before we were limited by our setup, by our other facility, and by the facilities that we traveled to deliver those programs. And now it just provides an option. The space over at the Grove is accessible. It allows us to be able to provide participants more room if that's what they need, more supports. So there's not a limit to how many bodies we can have in the space. And then because we have all this amazing garden space over there, it's allowed us to really grow out our garden education programming, which provides just a deeper and more enriching learning opportunity for kids, and more hooks. I'm going to say it that way. So more opportunities to really grab kids at the point where they express some interest and just really engage them. And again, food is so powerful. It doesn't take much to inspire young people and get them excited about learning more and trying more. And it's changed everything for us. So it was a really good year, and we're really excited about continuing to grow our programs and just do a better job reaching Londoners where they are and where they need to be.
Yeah. A year ago when we talked about how the province had put teaching kids how to grow food and learning more about, they put it in the curriculum. And I know that you were part of all of that process that led it up to that point. How has that gone since that time, since they announced that that's what they were going to do? It was a year ago. Anything new there?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, getting the curriculum changed was such a big deal for us. But you also have to recognize the fact that just because something's in the curriculum doesn't mean it's taught in every classroom. And nor does it mean that teachers are receiving proper training to be able to teach it well.
Yeah.
The part that's exciting to me about the way that the curriculum was done is it was written in a way that you don't have to have food in the classroom in order to teach the material. You don't have to have a certain skill set level with preparing food in order to teach the material. It's embedded within the science curriculum. So, it provides teachers an opportunity to, when they're teaching a lesson on how systems work, as an example, that they can use the food system as one of those examples to help kids learn. We were very lucky to have been included in the resources that were created for teachers and how to teach this material. There was a collaboration from organizations all across the province in putting together training materials, lesson plans, and resources for teachers. And ours alone, last year, just in that first 12 months that it was available, we had over 12,000 teachers download our materials all across Ontario. So it's also neat to know that our materials are being used in classrooms that we may not even know about. So that's also really exciting. And I hope that it's something we'll continue to build off of. And I'm excited to see the next update of how many people have accessed that material since we last looked.
So, you and I have been around a while. Sometimes these initiatives are announced from a certain level of government that they want things put in policy or put in place within communities, and then they don't provide the backup resources that are required to make that work. Is what you're saying is some of that is being done and it's allowing it to move ahead? Or are you saying not enough is being done? Or are you saying, no, nothing's really being done, we're producing it a lot ourselves? What are you saying?
It's somewhere in between. So it still is on teachers to take the initiative to find good resources to teach new curriculum, and that's not unique to the food literacy content in the grade 1 to 9 science curriculum. That's just kind of how it works.
Yeah.
Teachers, curriculum has changed. They may be given, depending on where they are in the province and how their board approaches it, they may be given 1, maybe 2 days maximum of professional development opportunities for them to dive into the curriculum and work together on how to access it. But for the majority of them, it's kind of up to them to look up materials that resonate with them and how they want to teach the material. So I don't want to speak to that because I know that is the standard. I think definitely it's something there could be improvements on, but not where I'm an expert by any means. What I am excited about is that the ministry really listened to who provided the input on the content that ultimately became the curriculum and provided opportunities for all of those stakeholders. And there were 150 some of us just in the Ontario Healthy School Food Coalition that contributed to the content that eventually turned into curriculum. And we were all given opportunities to apply to submit content for those training resources. And I really appreciate that. It showed that the ministry showed a lot of faith and trust in that collective and us as individuals, and was very thrilled that we were able to, Growing Chefs specifically, were able to provide some of those materials. And I'm really, really excited that we've had such positive feedback from those materials. And ours, just if anyone's interested, you can access those training resources and materials on the growingchefsontario.ca website. You can also find them on the OPHEA, which is the Ontario Physical Health and Health Education Association. I screwed up that acronym. Ontario Physical Education and Health Educators Association.
Yeah.
You can find it on their site as well.
So that's a bit of the opposite sometimes of what we see. It's terrible to have a bunch of funding thrown at a problem without having input from communities. We have been through that as well, and we have seen that. So I think that's really important that the ministry listened, because I know this has been a lot of years. People like you and others have been trying to get that there, and we all understand the importance of schools. So I'm glad to hear that, Andrew, and it meant all the work that you did as well got out there because they listened to you. I think that's really great.
Yeah, and you know what? Since we're having this conversation, it's been a really interesting exercise for the collective, because it's so easy when you achieve changing the curriculum. It's, as you said, something we've been talking about, advocating for years and years.
Yeah.
When it finally comes, it's not the whole curriculum. It's not even science past grade 9, like grade 10, 11, 12 isn't done. And it isn't everything we ask to be put in there. So there is a tendency for people to go, well, that's not perfect. It's not everything that we asked for. And as a collective, finding space to both celebrate what was done, still be able to advocate for more, but continue to foster and build those relationships with the ministries and with government that may or may not change sometime soon, is such an important process of these big changes that we're advocating for. So as much as I'm really thrilled with how the ministry responded for the most part, and definitely want to focus on the positive of what was done there. And really, that the collective has had some experience finding that middle ground of being able to be appreciative, to being able to build on that relationship, celebrate the victories and still be able to advocate for improvements where they are. And I think that's something in these big projects that we're starting to talk about in terms of like changing and improving processes in our community, that you have to be able to do both of those things at once. Because there's always a million reasons to point out why something isn't perfect. There's always a million reasons to not start doing something. And very rarely are the first steps in big change perfect in themselves. And they're really easy to kind of dissect and tear apart. And you can get caught up in that and not see things move forward at all.
Yeah.
So I've been really pleased with the process from both sides, the ministry, from the collective, and seeing how that middle ground has been found. And hopefully we can continue in that way.
Yeah, that's good. Well, let's get into the meat of what I wanted to talk to you about. When you and I got to know one another a number of years ago, there was an effort put in place, largely spearheaded by the London Community Foundation, in which, there were discussions going on. Do we need to do more around food security? And if we did, how would we move that forward down through the years? And so a bunch of us met. You were there as well. And what they ended up doing, it was great. I mean, they had some funders who paid into it. That included the city. And a food assessment was created during that time. And I always liken it to the Constitution. It's one of the best documents I'd ever read. It was so thorough. A group from Toronto had been hired to come in. They spent a long time at it. And they kind of laid the groundwork of where is food wasted, in the region. So they just didn't do London. They did the region as well in Middlesex County. But they also talked about where the opportunities were, where there were food deserts, all of those things. It was great. And then it was realized, who is the body then? Who would be the corporate group that would carry that forward? And it was decided to start the Middlesex London Food Policy Council. So that included people from the region and also people from within London. Now, the food bank has been the financial manager of that for that particular time. So I've been able to keep up a bit with it, with what's going on there. But I did feel personally that for a period of time, there was kind of a dropping off after that big moment. And a lot of the larger groups, food bank included, who could have probably maintained more of an interest and helped to keep it going. We were being challenged by other things, and then came the pandemic and all those things. But the Food Policy Council has continued to meet, and they've continued to do some remarkable things. And the thing I was the happiest about was that the city had given some funds to upgrade or update that food assessment. I'm sure you'll get into that in a minute. But it seems to me that what's different between now and then is that I think there's been much more of a collaborative spirit going on in the community in these last 2 or 3 years, right? Whereas before there was a willingness from, to get something going. That was great. But I think a lot has happened. You're intricately involved with the Food Policy Council. I was also at Western Fair a couple of weekends ago with Jane, when you were kind of hosting a session and getting input from other people about how they felt about things. I'm talking way too much here, but I wondered if you could just give us your sense of where that is at. We can talk about some of the partners and stuff, but the Food Policy Council itself, which I think is vital to London's future, where do you think it's at? How do you think it's going?
I think, like everyone else, Food Policy Council is in a pretty good place. We've got a great group of people around the table that I think represent the whole of the food system pretty well.
Yeah.
I think that the work that they're doing, although sometimes it goes sight unseen, is really, really good in trying to figure out how to move us forward towards a more food secure and community and a more sustainable local food system. I think I completely agree with you. Like, everything changed through the pandemic, so the need to update the community food assessment it was perfect timing for it. If we hadn't started that process yet, we'd be saying it was overdue. And I think they did a really good job of it. So now it sets things up for what happens next. So as you mentioned, we just hosted a public input gathering at the Western Fair a couple of weeks ago. presented a very high overview of the research. A lot of the people likely wouldn't have read the entire assessment update by that point. But we did go over the recommendations and next steps from that in detail, and got a lot of really positive impact from people in terms of helping us prioritize where they saw the first step should be, helping us prioritize where the public feels the role that the Food Policy Council should and shouldn't be playing in trying to forward some of those objectives, and a lot of talk about collaboration. And I think that's as you mentioned, we are seeing the need. It feels like we've kind of recognized that the time we've been talking about for as long as I've been involved in the nonprofit sector, it's now 15 years here in London, the need to revisit how siloed everything was, and how there really was obstacles put up from funding to logistics to there's territorial things going on that kept organizations from collaborating, even when they're working for the same community, the same portions of the community. And I think everybody's kind of come to a place where it's like, we're never going to get out of this cycle that we're in, and able to fix some of these core problems unless we start to work together, strategize together, and coordinate all of the efforts that we're making to be able to try and have more impact. And we're seeing that happening in other sectors, and it's really great to be having these conversations now. And I'm really hopeful that the Food Policy Council can be a leader in helping to initiate these recommendations that have come out of this report.
But for that to happen, funding is really going to be necessary. I mean, the Food Policy Council has been working away in a shoestring, to be honest, right? So we as a food bank, we've committed, more funds to the Food Policy Council over the course of the next 5 years to help with that, and we're trying to recruit others to do the same. But you can have all of these ideas, and yet without the funding, it's really hard for the Food Policy Council, because a lot of these people have other jobs, just like you do, Andrew, and it's exhausting trying to do all of that, because things like the food assessment is a massive telescopic kind of view of what's going on in this part of the country that we live in. And so funding is going to be really important, and I think it's really up to groups like ourselves and others to try to get some of that funding, and not just depend on the Food Policy Council to spend all of its time filling out grants and rushing around and trying to do all these things. They should be allowed to do their work. I presume that you're feeling some of that fatigue that comes in living in that kind of situation. Is that correct?
Definitely. And right now is a really, really difficult time to be having conversations for any nonprofit around funding. Like there's not a lot going on when having the curriculum change, we talked about that earlier, was very much a part. There were some funders in kind of 2018 to about 21, 22 that were providing small grants to organizations to give them capacity to be at the table together and form these collectives. The national and the provincial coalitions for healthy school food are not long-standing collectives, and they were very much formed because key organizations were able to dedicate time and capacity to be at that table, where it wasn't expected that it was people doing it volunteer above and beyond their paid jobs. And Growing Chefs was no different. I personally had a budgeted amount of time on a monthly basis to be able to dedicate to those networks. And that's how a lot of this work was actually able to produce outcomes, to actually create some change. It takes time, and as you said, it takes capacity and resources. What we learned in the process was it doesn't need to be overly complicated, and it doesn't have to cost $1 million. You can take organizations that are well situated, well versed on the material, and have key things to contribute, and go, what if we just gave you 4 to 6 hours a month, or 8 to 10 hours a month, to be able to help to contribute and forward these things. And that's what you see out of the new community food assessment is that it's going to take incremental actions from many different people and many different sectors happening at the same time, and in a coordinated effort to forward to create change and move those things forward, because the change that is needed, and it's very clear coming out of this assessment, that the changes that are needed are multifaceted, they're complex, they're big, and they're going to require work from all sides of the issue. If you want, just as an example, achieving food security in the community, and forgive me because I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it's not just we got to give more money to the food bank and this problem is going to go away. And yes, we need to be giving more money to the food bank. The need is higher than it's ever been before, but we also need policy change. We also need supports for producers and for growers and distributors to be able to really acknowledge the need to produce product and move it around in slightly different ways than we're doing right now. We need to be educating the public on what a food secure community is and what other benefits and outcomes we're going to see in the community as a result of increasing our food literacy and having people focus on understanding what the complexities of food security. Like we said, it's not as simple as just get the people who need any food as quickly as possible. There's prevention. There's continued research and evaluation. There's policy change that has to happen. There's advocating for some big institutions that have a lot of buying power, where we don't tend to think about how the buying power of major institutions in our communities shape food availability for others, for smaller players and for individuals. If we can start to strategically look at all of those things concurrently and track and measure the progress we're making in all of those different ways, it's going to take time. And there's going to be a period of time where people go, I don't really understand or see where all of this effort is going. And then all of a sudden, we saw it a few weeks ago at the Western Fair, where people did come into this event and go, yeah, I mean, I'm here to learn about what's been going on because I'm not seeing anything. And then when people saw the research and saw the outcomes and the recommendations and what the picture that was being painted of what the vision for this food secure future in London and Middlesex looked like, everybody got really excited. And I was really interested to see if people were going to be critical, if they were going to be, have that approach we talked about at the beginning. We're like, okay, this is a good start, but it's not where we need to be. And ultimately, it was a very constructive and positive energy in the room. There was a lot of constructive conversations, and people were talking about how big the task is that's in front of us, how much work needs to be done, how there aren't enough resources to do it. Yeah. But it was in a positive and constructive way. It didn't have some of the tone of some of the other projects we're seeing that are happening in our community, where there is a struggle to keep those conversations positive, and where things can really quickly shift into becoming just critical about work that's already happened and mistakes that have already been made, and using those arguments as a way to inhibit moving forward, if that makes sense. Yeah. And there wasn't any of that, which I was really, that's what I came away with, was like, wow, everybody was eager to learn more, eager to be honest about the challenges that are there, but also eager to be positive and hopeful about some of the recommendations and ways to move forward with them.
So I really struggle with this point. Around food and food insecurity. I think what we've been trying to say as the food bank for probably the last 7-8 years is that feeding people who are in low-income situations and trying to help them, that is food insecurity. Those are people that don't have the income, they don't have the access, they're maybe in constrained circumstances, it's difficult. But I think this is so important for all of us to understand. For instance, I was with a group last week who said, why doesn't the food bank take more of a leadership role when it comes to food security? Now, I think to a certain degree, we're trying to talk about it, but the last thing you want actually is the food bank leading that discussion. Because as soon as you do that, people start thinking, oh, it's a charitable effort. It's for helping people of low income or whatever. Food security is about accessibility to good food, nutritional, local, no waste, all of that. But it's accessible by everybody in the community, not just people who are struggling financially. And I think even in speaking with people today, leaders in the community, they think when you're talking food insecurity, you're talking about feeding the hungry. And that is a very important aspect of it. But I think food security is this other thing. And the group that should really be leading it, I would presume, should be the Food Policy Council, not just because of its qualifications, but because that's why it was originally designed, was to bring in all of those different aspects to do it. Do you have a thought on that?
I 100% agree with you. They also, the Food Policy Council doesn't have an agenda the same way that a single organization would.
Yeah.
And I think you said it, and it's a subtle difference, but it's a really important difference. Does the food bank, should they be leading those conversations? Mm-hmm. And I agree with you 100% that's not the case. Should they be present, engaged in those conversations, helping Absolutely. To guide them at times? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But when you have one group like the food bank, a Growing Chefs would be another one. If we tried to lead that conversation just the same way you would, we bring our own agenda to the table. We have things to gain and to lose from how those conversations go. We have our own priorities that are different from the priorities of, for example, the Food Policy Council. The fact that I'm involved in both requires an exercise that I think the Food Policy Council has done very well, which is it's okay to bring our concerns and our priorities to the table, but we also know when to leave them at the door when we're making decisions as a council. And it's not an easy process, but it is something that the Food Policy Council is very good with the infrastructure they have set up to be able to make sure that that's happening, and that we're not making decisions as a council that are representing any particular agenda of single members of the council. And I agree with you. They should be the ones quarterbacking that, because you also, when you don't have anyone leading those conversations, you end up in my analogy is in a baseball game when there's a pop-up and you end up with your two infielders and your outfielder. You've got the three of them and the ball falls in between and nobody actually took the lead to catch it. You risk that type of thing happening. So you do need someone calling the shots, guiding those conversations. And as we mentioned at the beginning, the issue is that takes resources. It takes a little bit of funding. It doesn't have to be astronomical. It doesn't have to be overly complicated, but it needs to be there and present so that those conversations happen in a strategic way, and that we're ensured that we're doing our due diligence and making sure that the right people are at the table for those conversations, and that it's not just it's not just the larger organizations. It's not just the food bank and the health unit and Growing Chefs at the table, that it encompasses as many of the players in our community as possible, to have those conversations and make sure they're being coordinated and moved forward strategically.